to make a knowledge claim about the world, right? That there are no gods.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that atheism is true, atheism cannot make any knowledge claims about the world. It's impossible to justify those knowledge. I mean, you can make them arbitrarily. You could just arbitrarily say whatever you want. But the argument that we discuss in here, and if you guys could show us why it's wrong, then we welcome being proven wrong, right?
And how is that entailed by the claim there are no gods?
It's entailed by the claim that there are no. So our position is that when you claim, if you have the worldview that there are no gods, knowledge claims are impossible.
Well, that's your claim, though, right? But for it to be a contradiction, it also has to be our claim.
No,
it's not.
What do you mean your claim? I don't understand.
Well, it would have to be entailed by the claim there are no gods from the perspective of an atheist.
No, so take somebody who's like a relativist when it comes to truth.
Me.
And you say to the person, let's say somebody says there is no truth. They take the position there is no truth. And then you're like, well, that's self-defeating because aren't you asserting that as a true statement? And the person's like, well, no, according to me, there's just no truth and I can make that claim anyway. It's what are you talking about?
Well,
you can't do that.
That can get complicated, but relativism isn't entailed by atheism.
I'm not talking about, did I say that?
Right, I know it was your example, but I'm saying that example isn't entailed by atheism.
No, that example was in response to your objection. Your objection was that the atheist has to acknowledge the contradiction. And so I brought up that example to be the person who's being contradictory doesn't have to acknowledge anything. They're just being contradictory.
Oh, well, what I mean is there would have to be an argument that denying the existence of God means denying the existence of whatever knowledge.
Yes, exactly. That's one of our arguments. It's the transcendental argument. So it basically argues that in an atheist worldview or a non-God or a natural worldview, the preconditions that you need to have knowledge, you can't justify those things. Those things you just have to smuggle in. But then you're not really providing an account for what knowledge is, because it's layered on top of these transcendental categories that you have no account. You can't account for them.
Right. So if somebody denies that God is a necessary condition of knowledge, then when they deny God, they're not denying a necessary condition of knowledge from their own perspective. So they're not contradicting themselves.
The argument isn't that the contradiction arises out or directly arises from the person's denial of God. If you have some other way of providing an account for the transcendental categories that are argued as the necessary preconditions for knowledge, if you can account for them, if you could say, here's what these things are and how they're grounded, and here's an explanation, which no one has ever been able to do, then you could do it without using God.
But I think what you just said is that there's no contradiction in atheism.
No, I said there is a contradiction.
But you just said that it doesn't arise from the denial of God.
It arises from adopting a naturalistic worldview in which it's not possible. And if you can provide a counterexample, then you can negate the claim and say, look, you're saying it's impossible. Look, here's how it's done, or here's a tenable, model for how it's done, or something like that. But we haven't gotten
entailed by atheism.
Atheism entails naturalism.
No, it doesn't.
How you're saying you could be an atheist and believe in the supernatural?
Oh, I mean, I take naturalism to be the claim that everything thinkable is somehow connected to the natural sciences.
It's less about the sciences. It's just that all that exists is the natural world. And then there's an open question of how do you exactly define the natural world? Because of course philosophy has to define everything. And then it's certain concepts are like fundamental concepts. So if everyone pretty much understands when you say the natural world, what you're talking about, but then actually defining that is like a challenge. But that's kind of what it is. It's just like saying like everything's natural. Like I don't see how an atheist. I mean, I guess an atheist could believe in ghosts or something.
Well, I mean, the reason that it's important is because, like there are lots of non-naturalist positions like dualism or idealism, right? These aren't naturalist positions, and they are compatible with atheism.
I think they're compatible with naturalism.
They're arguably
idealism and dualism aren't compatible with naturalism, right? Like those guys are enemies.
Well, I was going to say I might be confusing naturalism with materialism a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing that's enemies with naturalism is supernaturalism. The other stuff, I don't think is a direct like contradiction.
I don't think that's a normal way of doing it.
I don't think we're really disagreeing. I mean, I think like the point that I was making is that like it's like almost the example I mentioned earlier with the person who's like, there's no truth, and then they're asserting like a truth claim. It's that type of analogy. That's where the contradiction, in my opinion, is, because the person's saying like there are no gods, and then that's a claim about the world, and then when you're like, how do you justify that? Can you provide
to say there's a contradiction?
No, but it's not even like, can you provide a justification for that claim? We're saying you can't provide a justification for any of your claims because they're all built on these presuppositional things that you can't account for. You're just
that's not like, a contradiction.
That is a contradiction.
Well, I mean, contradiction is right, like P and not P.
Right.
This so the P, and not this.
Right. So the P would be knowledge claim, and the contradiction would be you can't make knowledge claims.
That's not a contradiction.
Knowledge claim and no knowledge claim is not a contradiction. That's a negation.
That's not what you said before. And like a contradiction, like it's got to be between two full sentences, right? So what are the two sentences?
No, it could be P and not P. So knowledge claim,
proposition, sentence.
Okay, so those are the two propositions, P and not P.
Right. What are they? What are the two propositions?
Okay. On the left side, P is the proposition that you're making a claim about the world. And then on the other side, our view is you can't make any claims about the world.
That's not a contradiction. The contradiction would be I am making a claim and I am not making a claim.
Okay, that's the contradiction, dude.
Making a claim and not making a claim?
Are purporting to make a claim, but you're not actually making one.
That's not a contradiction. A contradiction is the exact same sentence. One has the word not in front of it.
Okay. So when the person says there is no truth, is that a contradiction?
I mean, that gets complicated quick, but...
What's the distinction?
Well, look, that gets complicated quickly, but I see where you're going with it.
Okay, so good.
You say there is a truth, there is no truth.
Right. And the other example is, here's a claim, but there is no claim. It's the same thing. Like you're purporting to say, I know something about reality, and our argument is like, you cannot make that claim. You could arbitrarily just say things, but you don't actually have the ability to make knowledge claims. That's what the transcendental argument is.
You initially said that making a claim and not making a claim. Yes, that's a contradiction. But then you went on to say making a claim and can't make a claim. That's not a contradiction.
Okay, because we're having like I hope somewhat casual conversation where...
Well, I mean, it's important, right? Because a contradiction is the same sentence, one without the not and one with a not, but it's got to be the same sentence.
But conceptually, if we're having a conversation and I explain to you what I mean, but then you're like, but you didn't use that word. It's like, but we've been talking about this for 15 minutes now, so you must know what I'm talking about.
If it's two different propositions, it's not a contradiction.
It's a contradiction when something negates the other thing. Both simultaneously can't be true at the same time, right? You're saying that unless I use the literal identical words to describing what the thing is and its negation, then it's not really a negation. And what I'm saying is that's absurd.
Well, sorry, it can be a negation, but it's not a logical one.
Dude, I don't care. Look, you've already said that you understand my line of reasoning. So now should we debate this theoretical thing about who was right and who was wrong? Who cares?
Well, sure, but it's not a logical contradiction.
You've already said that when I brought up like the person who says there is no truth, is that a contradiction?
Because are they going to want to assert, if they assert that is a truth, then yeah, sure.
Okay. How is that any different than the person who makes a knowledge claim when they cannot make knowledge claims?
Because like the truth person is saying there is a truth and there is not a truth. That's a direct contradiction.
The other person is making a knowledge claim when they can't make a knowledge claim. They don't have the capacity to do it, and yet they're purporting to do it.
Yeah, so it's not a logical contradiction, right? You can say it's a performative contradiction.
Okay. It's contradictory in the sense that atheism is purporting to make a claim about the world, but it cannot do that. Assuming the atheistic worldview is true, the person who adopts that worldview cannot make knowledge claims. That's a contradiction.
So really quick, this may be like a valid critique of like a coherentist epistemology, maybe, or like some relativist epistemology, or any of these like maybe like new theories of truth that try to square like subjectivism or whatever. But like atheism doesn't entail that. Like you could be an atheist and be a foundationalist about truth, or be an externalist about justification, or any of these things, right? These people exist, like in philosophy, in academic philosophy.
I think you misunderstood. I only brought up the truth example to illustrate how it's a contradiction in terms of somebody making a claim about something that they can't actually do. That's a contradiction. So that's all. That's the only reason I brought up truth at all. Because,
like a performative contradiction.
If someone is like a,
whether you want to call it like I don't think it's performative. I think it's analytical. The position is okay. So forget the person. Let's say it's an AI computer or it's a proposition or whatever. You don't need a person. It's contradictory conceptually. Why is that so hard to understand?
Well, what does
if you have a worldview, that is just like the person, like I keep going back to person, but maybe that's going to confuse you. But just like in the situation where somebody asserts like that there is no truth, is that performative because they're asserting it?
If they're asserting it as a truth, yeah.
But why are you distinguish? Who cares? What are you talking about? Who cares? It's contradictory.
But what?
Why are you adding on? Why are you trying to qualify it?
Because you're giving one example that works and then another example that doesn't.
Okay, you're not okay. If you're going to object, then you have to give a substantive objection. You can't just say like, "Oh no, that's not what it is," and just like you have to explain why is it not contradictory.
Look, I can explain the issue this way, right? This is going to take about 1 minute. So say Bob says he claims that the evidence indicates that Bigfoot killed JFK, right? And of course we're going to have all sorts of crazy questions, like why don't we have any evidence of Bigfoot? How did he travel to Texas without being seen? Why would Bigfoot kill JFK? Blah, blah, blah. But then the second person says the only logically possible explanation for JFK being killed is that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Right? That's this person's claim. It's the only logically possible explanation. The other person can say there's no contradiction in Bigfoot having killed JFK. That just means the person who said the only logical possibility is that Lee Harvey Oswald killed him is wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, so when somebody's saying the only logical possible explanation is this, so long as Bigfoot contains no contradiction, the other person's wrong.
But you could say the same thing in the truth example. Like, I could just say that the person who claims that there is no truth is just wrong, and there's no contradiction.
If they're asserting that it's true, there is no truth.
Yeah. I could just say they're wrong about their assertion, and there is no contradiction.
Well,
like, it's
I mean, there are people out there who will say there is no truth and have some weird technical meaning behind it, right? In which case, they wouldn't be contradicting themselves.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it should be. You could philosophy. I mean, of course, there's weird people out there who, solve this and everything.
Right. That's why. But if a person asserts it's true that there is no truth, then they are contradicting themselves.
Unless you say that they're wrong.
Well, it would be two sentences, right? Well, they're wrong. No, I mean, they'd be contradicting themselves. There is X and there is not X at the same time and in the same way.
You're the one who brought up the wrong thing.
Wrong about what?
You could just say, like, so if the person who says that, like, there is no truth, does that violate the law of non-contradiction?
Not necessarily, no.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. You could just say, like, no, they're just wrong. And there's no actual violation of the law of non-contradiction. If you assume that the person's correct, then it would be contradictory, and that would be impossible. But so what I'm saying in this scenario is, like, if
probably be them contradicting themselves.
Okay, if you assume atheism is correct, okay, there are no gods. The person is it's not simply that that's true, and we're just like, we're oblivious, and we haven't even, the thought of God, it hasn't even entered our mind. That would be a scenario. It'd be like, no, there is no contradiction there. In the sense that I'm describing, I think it would lead to other potential self-contradictory aspects of reality, but what I'm talking about here is, like, atheism as a positive statement about the world is contradictory in the sense that, assuming that worldview is true, that person cannot make positive truth claims about the world or knowledge claims about the world.
And how is that entailed by atheism?
Okay, it's entailed by atheism because the atheistic worldview cannot provide an account for what these things are. So when we use the word like knowledge or truth or any of these transcendental categories, these are immaterial things. We understand them to have certain properties that apply, right? And in the atheistic worldview, there is no account for these things.
If you cannot account,
it's a contradiction if it leads to your inability to make knowledge claims.
I mean, the contradiction would have to be, I can make knowledge claims and I cannot make knowledge claims.
No, the contradiction is you make any knowledge claim. That is a contradiction. If you cannot make any and you make one, you've created a contradiction. If you don't make any knowledge claims, and
criticism, right?
If you walk around like an android and you don't make any knowledge claims, there's no contradiction.
It's supposed to be an internal criticism, right? You believe this, but this conflicts with the other thing you believe.
It's both. I think it's both an internal and external critique. I think it's just saying, like, it's internal in the sense that, like, it's just saying, okay, grant your position, and it leads to absurdity. It leads to contradictions.
Right, and then so how does the denial of God, right, entail the denial of, like, whatever?
So the denial of God, what happens is once you deny God, then you pretty much have to explain, like, if you want to make claims about the world, right, like, how that happens. Like, what are you doing when you're making a knowledge claim? What does that entail?
Why does that follow from, like, so, like, when I deny the existence of God, I'm denying the object of the ontological, cosmological, and moral arguments. Why does that have entailments about epistemology?
Because epistemology is prior to metaphysics.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with the object of those three arguments?
So you're purporting to make an epistemological claim, right? I don't know how many times I feel like I'm being repetitive, but you're not accepting my answer, because it keeps coming back to you're denying something, and then you want when the burden comes back to you to be like, on what basis is your denial? What is the ground of your denial? Start from the foundation and explain how you've led to this conclusion. And our position is that's impossible to do without some grounding for the necessary preconditions that you need to have knowledge claims. So what ends up happening is that you cannot account for your knowledge claims. That's contradictory, right? Because on one hand, earlier on, you were like, I have a knowledge claim, there is no God. And now when we're like, how did you get to that point? You can't account for it. So that has to negate your earlier claim. Both can't be true. You can't make the claim and then not be able to account for it. That's the whole point of a claim. The claim is that I have information or reasons that this is true. And then when you're like, why is it true? And you're like, I don't have any reasons, then your claim is totally vacuous.
So do you have more than a thumbnail sketch of how numbers relate to the mind of God?
They do, in the sense that we understand numbers to be part of logic, and the logos is
what I'm asking is, could you write an essay on it off the top of your head?
I could, in the sense that an essay is just going to describe it, and sure, but it doesn't, it's not any sort of I don't think it's any sort of objection to raise these sort of the
reason
I don't know how to describe, I don't really know how to describe what the objection is, but
so the reason I bring it up is that I really have no clue how a philosophy of mathematics, right? I just don't have the slightest clue how to do philosophy of mathematics. And I assume there are lots of Christians that also don't know anything about the philosophy of mathematics. Does that mean we can't all say 2 + 2 = 4?
No, that's not.
I'll just flat out admit I don't know how math works.
Right. I don't know if you were in the room earlier, but I brought up a similar example than you just did, because I was saying I don't know how my iPhone works, but I know how to use it. That's totally irrelevant.
But the ability to use a tool is a little bit different than math. I brought up math specifically because it is a conceptual thing, right? I can't explain the concepts at all. Does that mean I'm contradicting myself when I say 2 + 2 = 4?
No, but how do you know it's true? It's not
I said, I can't do philosophy of math for shit.
Could just be having, but what I'm saying is that this comes up a lot when in these conversations, because I think it gets interpreted as we're saying, I think it gets interpreted as you cannot have knowledge, and so people are like, yeah, but I know what I had for dinner tonight, or and that's not what the argument is.
But I'm openly admitting I can't account for my knowledge of math, right? I don't know where to begin with that.
Okay.
So am I contradicting myself when I say 2 + 2 = 4?
No, and I'll explain to you why. When you say 2 + 2 = 4, I don't think anyone in hearing you say that, let's say you're at a restaurant, you're running a tab or something. Anytime you're using math in that type of situation, it's not being interpreted as you making a truth claim or knowledge claim about the world in that sort of abstract sense. It's just
come on.
Of course it is. It's a calculation. No one's saying you're adopting the position that 2 + 2 = 4, right?
Wait, but I do definitely adopt the position that you owe me this much money.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is it's not. No one takes it as you adopting the worldview that 2 + 2, and that's what we're saying with atheism. You're making a knowledge claim about the world, the whole world, and probably the most important thing about the entire world, right? And we're saying like
claim about the world.
No, like so the difference is like whether you could back it up, right? Can you substantiate it? And if you can't, then you can't make the knowledge claim. That's just
no. That's not necessarily true.
But I've already said I can't back up the claim.
Like if you can't back it up, wait, are you saying that you can make claims and not have to back them up, and there's no contradiction?
Well, wait, I can't back up.
No, there's no contradiction, but it may be it may be false. It's just a false claim, not a contradictory one.
I am saying I can't back up 2 + 4 using philosophy of math. I don't know how.
But you don't need to assert 2 + 2 = 4 because no one's taking it that you're adopting the worldview that 2 + 2 = 4.
Of course I am.
No, it's not a philosophical worldview position. That's what you think it is. Like if you're at a restaurant, somebody's like, "Oh, what's the tab? You owe me $20." They think you're adopting the worldview that like numbers are abstract objects or something.
So 2 + 2 = 4 is you can assert that from a variety of worldviews.
Exactly.
Well, there you go.
It's not a worldview laden statement that anyone is interpreting as you making some sort of worldview statement.
Okay. But isn't that the claim that presuppositional apologetics makes?
Yeah, exactly.
Worldview laden?
That's what? Yeah. Everything is. I mean, I think everything is.
You just contradicted yourself.
I don't. No. What I'm saying is that when you make, there's a difference about you just saying like, well, to give you an example, like, and let's go back to mathematics. Let's go back to the one you mentioned. Right. There's a difference if we use something like math functionally, right? And we may not be able to, like, philosophically provide a foundation for it. That is a problem. I'm not saying that's not a problem. But what is your overall point? So let's say I'm like, yes, that's a problem. What is your point?
Overall point is that I don't know shit about philosophy of math, and I'm not contradicting myself when I say you owe me $4.
So, okay. Can you just describe your point without using an example? Can you just put it in conceptual, what exactly like you're trying to say? You're saying that, are you saying that you're making a knowledge claim in that situation, but you can't provide an account for the knowledge claim, but you're saying you don't feel that's a contradiction?
Because one...
Like, I'm not clear what you're saying.
Well, how am I going to rephrase this? The point of what I'm saying is that like a lack of philosophical grounding for a statement is not itself a contradiction.
Okay, but it can lead to one, right?
No, not.
You would have to demonstrate that.
No, wait, you said no? Enraged?
Not necessarily.
You would have to demonstrate the contradiction.
I didn't say it necessarily led to one. I said it can lead to one, though,
okay.
Right?
If it doesn't necessarily lead to one, and you want to assert there is one, then you have to show what it is.
This situation, it does, right? That's what I'm saying. Like in this situation with atheism, logic,
what's the contradiction?
It's not. I've said it too many times, dude. I don't want to keep repeating it.
The thing you'd have to
I would like to know what the P and not
because
P
you
is.
claim there is no God.
The thing that you would have to assert when somebody says there is no God, you'd have to assert that it's analytically true that they're also claiming there are no conditions of whatever, like knowledge. But people don't take themselves to be asserting that, right? So you'd have to show that there is a necessary contradiction there.
No,
or necessary
it doesn't matter what the person's subjective state of mind is. Now we're going back to the scenario where the person who claims that there is no truth, they could be wrong, and it's this whole thing. That doesn't matter. Well, it's just like, assume that worldview is true. What are the implications? What are the ramifications? Our position is that if you assume atheism is true, that the person who adopts that position now has no grounding to make any knowledge claims about the world.
Look, I can give an example of what I mean.
That's a contradiction.
Somebody asserts there is a cat on the mat, And they assert there is no mammal on the mat. Right? We can say that's a contradiction because a cat is a mammal. But if the person denies a cat is a mammal, if they say they have a totally different taxonomy, and under their taxonomy, a cat is a lizard, is a reptile, then when they say there is a cat on the mat and there is no lizard and there is no mammal on the mat, they're not contradicting themselves.
Wait, hold on 1 second. I was listening, but I was trying to pause you for a second, so I have to just log off my work computer. Hold on a second. But I think I understand what you're saying, but I think so. I'm not saying it's a direct contradiction. Like the claim that there is no God does not directly contradict the fact. Like it's by implication.
Right.
What's the implication?
So do you see the analogy? Right. You think cats are mammals. I think they're reptiles. Right. I think there's a cat on the mat, but there's no mammal on the mat. I'm not contradicting myself.
Okay, so wait, hold on a second. Okay, now I logged up. Okay, so you're saying, give me that one more time.
So you think cats are mammals. I think cats are reptiles. When I say there's a cat on the mat and there's no mammal on the mat, I'm not contradicting myself.
Yes, you are.
But how so?
Oh my God.
You're saying that because you're subjectively wrong? That
No.
You're not contradicting?
No, I just define cats as reptiles.
But what matters is what it actually is, right?
Not for the purpose of self-contradiction.
It's self-contradiction, yeah.
Wait, hold on. You're saying that the actual reality of what the animal is. So we know cats are mammals, and this person is saying there's a cat on the mat and there are no mammals on the mat. That's a contradiction.
No.
In his mind, subjectively, he thinks it's a refrigerator on the mat is irrelevant. He's
not a contradiction.
It's not a self-contradiction, and there's no internal criticism to be made.
No, the statement, the proposition is self-contradictory.
What is the self-contradiction?
That there's a cat on the mat, but there's no mammal on the mat. The cat is a mammal.
Look, I'll just use variables, right? I say A's are B's. You say A's are C's. I say there's an A on the mat, but there is no C.
It's the proposition. It's what the proposition is. Why are you struggling?
No. The proposition alone, there's no contradiction. Now, listen, like I understand it's frustrating because obviously cats are mammals, but if like, let's say you were actually having a conversation with this person, there's no inherent contradiction in that statement. So where would you move next? You would attack the premise.
It's an inherent contradiction.
You would attack the premise that cats are lizards. No. Yeah, but the contradiction isn't contained in those sets of statements. If there is a contradiction in the worldview, it's contained in the justifications for the premise that cats are lizards, and that's where you would go next.
What is the proposition?
Look, it's just
in this example. In this example, he's saying cats are lizards. There is a cat on the mat.
No, that's not
the proposition is there's a cat on the mat.
Right.
There's no mammal on the mat.
Correct.
That's sorry. It's really
the cat is a mammal. Listen, I'm not doing the 4th grade philosophy in here.
Look, we'll just drop the cat and lizard thing, right? I say A's are B's. You say A's are C's. I can say there's an A and no C.
It doesn't matter what you say or think. It matters what is the case.
When it comes to internal criticism, it does matter.
Is it logically possible that we have miscategorized cats?
It doesn't matter if it's logically possible. It's completely irrelevant. So
yeah, that's why you would investigate this person's worldview and find out why they think cats are lizards. Maybe they have good justification. Maybe it's dog shit justification. But that's where you would move the conversation next. There's no inherent contradiction in the worldview as presented, like in the set of propositions they've presented.
The point is that like you could have derivative level contradictions. They don't have to be like expressed.
Derivative level contradictions. So please enlighten me what that is.
The one with the cat is actually a very good example because the cat, like you would have to know that the cat is a mammal to realize that there's a contradiction, right? Like maybe a child.
You're not answering the question. What is a derivative level of a contradiction?
explained it that like the
You just gave me an example.
So right,
Presumably,
but
it'd be
just
further entailment, right?
Exactly. It's just a further entailment. It's like the proposition wasn't.
Wait.
The proposition wasn't there's a cat on the mat and there's not a cat on the mat. The proposition was on the mat and there's no camel.
Sorry. Is that an example of a contradiction that's not a contradiction?
No.
Or something that is not a contradiction, an example of how you could say...
So we can just say why all this is important, right? You say God is the necessary condition of intelligibility. I disagree with that.
Well, you can, but you're just being, like, you have to provide a basis.
Well, no, it's just when I deny God, I'm not denying the necessary condition of intelligibility. Just like when I deny there's a mammal on the mat, right? Or when I deny there's a mammal on the mat, I'm not denying there's a reptile on the mat.
Well, like when you're denying, like, so once you deny God, then you're in like the no God world, right? And then it's now on you, since you're making claims about this world. You're making metaphysical claims, you're making knowledge claims about the world.
Well, his only claim is that there's no God.
Yeah, which is pretty
evident right now. Like, so his position is pretty damn strong.
The existence
right?
of God, I'm not denying the existence of intelligibility or the conditions of intelligibility.
You're not.
Which only apply if God didn't exist.
So
by the way,
now we're back to the person who's like blissfully unaware of like the ramifications of what their worldview is.
No,
right?
it's just
So
not
you could
entailed
think,
by my denial. It's not logically entailed whether I'm aware of it or not.
It's necessary entailment because once you remove. So the problem is, like, if we lived in a different universe, like, conceivably, I'm not sure if it's logically possible for such a universe to exist, but I think it is, you could almost envision it being different than the way it is now. And the problem for the person...
How can you do that?
Well, I mean, like, you could envision a universe of chaos, right? Where the laws of nature aren't regular, that all of a sudden they shift. Maybe
there'd be a limit to that, but yeah.
Yeah, like why? Like it could be.
But like, what do you mean by laws of nature? Because one of the laws of nature could be that all laws can be shifted.
So I didn't say laws of nature. I said the regularities of
yeah, well, that's
right. You can imagine a world of chaos, but there'd be like a limit to the chaos you can imagine because it would still have to take place against a temporal background, and you'd still have to imagine like individual moments that are stable enough for them to appear in your mind's eye.
No, like in other words, like it's not like I'm not saying like.
Can you imagine a world
chaos that you could? I'm not saying that. I'm saying like in this world, it's logically conceivable to think of a world of chaos. Like we can, right? So,
okay. Can you imagine a world in which math doesn't work?
Well, but anyways, the point is, yes, you can imagine a world of chaos. Yeah, within limits.
I don't know what you mean by within limits, but it's irrelevant. I think the point is that like the fact that we're not in such a world, right, and that we can envision like such a world. There are entailments in this world that have to be accounted for if you're going to be able to make these claims about this world.
I just thought it was something.
That's what our argument is. Like, you have to do that, or just be willing to bite the bullet. And not make these broad sweeping claims that you somehow know the true nature of like the metaphysical reality of the universe.
Yes, that's exactly right. Hold on, right? That's what you should do.
What do you mean?
Yeah, it's true.
No, what you were saying is like we should reject these broad sweeping claims, right? And we should consider ourselves agnostic.
I think that at best, no. I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to argue is you should become theists. Like, you should accept.
But the irony is, the alternative makes sense. It's like exactly what you should do. You just laid out the alternative. You said the alternative, like you said. Otherwise, we're gonna have to do all these things, and Like, you just basically explained agnosticism perfectly well, and it's like, yeah, that's like the appropriate alternative to the situation.
I think on the surface, yes, like on the surface, there's I think what I was trying to say was like, at this, the first thing you should do is like, when faced with a reductio, is remove whatever's causing the absurdity, right? So once you like come to terms with like, my worldview is it's not internally consistent, it's leading to these absurdities. Like, you're either going to accept that, and so you could accept nihilism, you could accept these, fringe worldviews, but what we really think is like, no one lives like that. And so like, when we talk about it, like, it's almost like, we know that you guys, or most atheists, or people who are non-committal about like God existing, that for all intents and purposes, like, you don't live your lives in line with like the actual ramifications of like, if that was really the case.
So right? Can you tell some of the ramifications?
So this is like the one that we're talking about right here, obviously, is like an intellectual ramification. Like, you cannot make these knowledge claims because you can't back them up. Because ultimately, like, you could attempt to, you could be like, no, but I could observe the world and I have observation. But then when you try to like, be like, wait a minute, but like, all of our sensory data and everything is contingent on these unexplained things, like the regularities of the laws of nature and the laws of logic, and all of these. And some of these other guys are much better talking about it than I am, but how they're interlinked. It's not like the laws of logic are independent from the regularities of the laws of nature. So in our view, it's like God unifies them, right? Like, God is like the unification for all these transcendental categories that we rely upon.
Well,
so
it's logically possible for there to be no regularities. Those two things aren't connected.
What do you mean? Like,
I mean, it's just logically possible for a world to have no natural regularities.
Yeah, we were talking about the one with chaos.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is like, the laws of logic are not like physical laws in the way that like we look at the regularities of nature. Like, those, we look at those as like affecting physical phenomenon, like matter and motion are affected by those, and that's obviously going to affect like our brain state to some extent. I don't think we ultimately know like how much, but I mean, but even without knowing that on a neurological level, I mean, it's still something you just have to presuppose that there's these regularities there, because otherwise you'd have this chaotic world where it doesn't seem like any type of reasoning would be possible.
That does not follow.
Well,
yeah. How does your own subjective presupposition cause reality itself to change?
Well,
what do you mean?
That's not what he's saying, right? I mean, like there has to be some regularity in order for consciousness to exist.
Sure, but
Exactly.
What I'm hearing is, if you don't presuppose that there's regularity in reality, then all of reality falls apart.
Consciousness would fall apart.
Okay, but isn't this kind of akin to? It's almost like saying, if I don't constantly think about a pink unicorn, the whole world will fall apart. Like, isn't that kind of what that's like saying?
No.
No, yeah, you're misunderstanding, like, visionary. It's not that we're not saying that, like, unless you adopt this like sort of epistemological like position or like understanding of like reality, then like somehow that's going to like collapse reality or something like that for you. What we're saying is simply like, you could be deluding yourself into thinking that like you actually have these knowledge claims, and you could just be having like an autonomic reaction. Everything could just be that way, right? Like, we don't even know perceptually like what we're even perceiving. Like, is it actually is it the way the external world really is, or is it more radically different, and we're incapable of actually experiencing like what the external world really is like. So
that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, you run into all these like philosophical issues, but we're not saying that. We're just
philosophical issues. Those are just good questions.
Right, but what I'm saying is like I don't even think you need to address some of that stuff. I think ultimately what this is just saying is like there's clearly these intangible. I think it's meant to address like the materialistic, whether you call it naturalism or materialism, where it's like everything just kind of boils down to like quarks and electrons. I mean, that's really all science can kind of. This comes up a lot in The Origin of Life. Where
that's just as far as we can see. That doesn't necessarily like there are entire philosophies about the deeper side of physics, right? But there's
none of that is entailed by atheism,
right? Yeah,
no, it's not entailed by atheism. But I just mean like I actually forgot what point I was making, but
like you mentioned, like perception of the external world, right? So analogously, like I said, I don't know anything about philosophy of mathematics. If somebody presses me, I really don't know how to prove that 2 + 2 = 4. Like if somebody presses me on the connection between perception and the world, I also might not have a great answer for that.
Well, okay, so I can give kind of an answer.
Well,
there's like a 100.
Let me finish my point. So, like I think we agreed that I'm not contradicting myself when I assert that you owe me $4, despite me not being able to explain philosophy of math. If I equally can't explain like the philosophy of perception, am I contradicting myself when I say there's a yellow cat?
No, because those, like the way I take that is that like you're not purporting to like it's not the type of thing where it's like you're adopting the position that there's like a yellow cat over there. Like that's just like a different statement than you just like blurting out there's a yellow cat over there.
No, I'm taking the position there's a yellow cat in the same way I'm taking the position that you owe me $4.
Or like maybe another way of addressing it is like maybe there is no express contradiction or whatever, but whether it's derivative on some level, like I don't know. I'd have to think about that. It's a good question.
Yeah. This is just the problem of premise 1 of tag.
Well, it's different though because I think it's somewhat disanalogous, and that's what I was trying to say. Like,
but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about premise 1 of tag.
Yes. But what I'm saying is that I think your example with the math thing may be disanalogous, because what I'm saying is like, in that situation, when you say 2 + 2 = 4, we almost like, I don't know. I know, like, so if you were to ask, I know there's a way of providing a proof in mathematics for simple arithmetic, but it's even very complex to do that, right? But I know that can be done. It probably takes 5 pages to establish something like that. But that's obviously, that's based on the axioms, right? So math, it's like you adopt a set of axioms, and then from those axioms, you're going to derive like truth statements.
Well, perhaps, right? But I have no clue how to argue for any of that.
I don't think you personally need to, right? Like, so if somebody could provide an account for knowledge claims, like then that would cover like all atheists. Like it's not like every individual atheist has to do it. We're saying like conceptually, we're not looking at it. I feel like what you're doing with your objections, which are I actually appreciate them. They're good thought experiments. But I feel like what you're doing is you're individualizing it. You're saying like, what if this individual says X and there's no contradiction? I'm not even talking about an individual. I'm talking about the concept of what's held by the concept of atheism. There's nothing to do with it.
I totally agree. But I think what you're saying like entails that like the precept method of interrogating someone's worldview is pointless because you are just talking to one person.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't think it's pointless in the sense that like if the person was open-minded, I think here's where all of these arguments for God, I think, run into the same problem, which is like if the person doesn't want to like change their beliefs, right? If they're not really open-minded and they're not sitting there coming at it with truly an open mind, even if they're leaning one direction or another. But what I think ultimately ends up happening, and like in life, we kind of don't do that, and we end up adopting positions. It's like, oh, pro-choice or this or that, and you kind of have a position, and then you're willing to change it like over time. You're not willing to do it like in any one conversation that you have. So it's almost like.
But that's like describing the process of conversion, right? Like my point is that like the support for P1 can't be an interrogation of an individual, right? Because it's a conceptual point. That means the support for the first premise like has to be its own independent argument. Somebody has to write an essay arguing that premise 1 is true.
Why an essay?
Well, I mean, could be like a monologue, or like whatever, right? Like it has to be like premise 1 has to have its own positive argument. It can't be the result of a discussion with someone who isn't a Christian.
Well, there's ways of establishing like that a premise is true. You could, it could just even be like I think we're so used to like in the philosophical world, like these formal debates and like they kind of present line by line like their evidence to support the premise, but it could just be like one word. It could be it could be anything. If you could convince somebody intuitively that the premise is true by uttering like a sentence to make your point, maybe depending on whatever the argument is, that should count. Like that's that's the whole purpose of it.
Do you see why I'm saying that like the support for the first premise can't be the result of like an interrogation of an individual, right? It has to be its own independent argument.
I mean, Socratic method is technically an interrogation, sort of like a dialogue.
Exactly. When you say interrogate, because one of the methods so people take different approaches, I think, in trying to like support premise 1, and one of them is like that you try to evidence like the impossibility of the contrary. And so if you're talking to someone and they're like saying like no, then you could be like, well then what is your alternative? Like provide an answer to these questions, because you're claiming up front that like that something's the case, my position's wrong, so then you should be able to answer these questions. Right. And then if the person can answer them, then you should be able to be like, look, see, like, isn't that evidence that like you overstepped earlier in the conversation?
Because like we've already done the math example, right? I have no clue how to prove to you that you owe me $4 conceptually.
But no. See, here's the difference. Like in the math example, there is a proof. You just don't know it.
Right.
Okay? That's different.
You can accept that.
So what's the argument is in the first premise is there is no no one. It's not like that specific guy over there in the corner can't do it. Mm-hmm. It's not possible to provide an account for these things. How could you? So if you're in a purist,
talking to me isn't going to help us figure out if there is in fact a concept. Like if there is in fact an explanation.
Well, just like there is like a philosophy. There's like a paper in epistemology about like I can't remember the author. I can do some research and look it up. But he actually kind of tackles this issue talking about. I think he uses the term like grandma, Timmy, and like Rover, where he talks about like people just everyday knowledge claims, so-called folk knowledge claims. When your grandma or a little kid says that they know something, right? And like whether or not they're even justified in doing so, unless they could provide like a robust theory of knowledge from an epistemological perspective. And I think most people would say, of course, they can say that they know something without explaining a robust, like most people cannot. So like language, just like your iPhone baked, like you were saying earlier, you can use your iPhone despite not knowing how it works. We can use the tool of language despite not necessarily having a robust theory of knowledge. And we may still even have good justification. Like grandma might have good justifications for saying it's raining outside, without... Anyway, this is an issue that's been tackled in philosophy before.
I think
when we talk about all that, we got to remember the context, right? That the precept claims that everything else is impossible.
What's up?
Like it's not just a lack of justification, right? It's impossibility.
Yeah.
Are you guys basically talking about skepticism, like skeptical philosophy?
Not really.
In this case.
No, I don't think so.
Like,
No, I mean,
like,
how do I know what
the precept line does use skepticism to try and like intuition pump a little bit, but it's not necessarily tied to that.
Part 2.
You have no way.
Sure.
Do you think
Exactly.
that Agent Smith's ignorance about what a person is more important than my ignorance about what math is?
I think it's an illustration that there's a double standard where Agent Smith likes to pound the table and demand evidence, but then there's all these things that he has no evidence or understanding for what they are at all, that are at the foundation of everything that he's building on top of, that he's then saying, give me evidence for this before I believe it. And then, because he said he could see the moon, and like all these things that I illustrated are clearly fallacious. Like, but is he going to change his position? No. But maybe, like, the hope is that over time people will see the error of their ways, and it's like you just have to both emotionally and, on all levels be able to change, your position on something so important.
I guess what I mean to say is, are he and I, like me with regards to math and Agent Smith with regards to persons, are we both like in the same position with regard to premise 1 of tag? Or rather, yeah. Like do both our versions of ignorance, like
no?
What do they have to do with premise 1 of tag?
So, because what I would say is that premise 1 of tag is the argument for premise 1 is that no one can provide justifications. It's not Agent Smith or you. But when you're in an individual conversation and you ask someone to provide a justification, you have to examine the one they provide, or their reasoning, or their, whatever their argument is. Right. So that may vary. But are you just making an analogy to say he doesn't have a justification for personhood, and that you're saying that that's disanalogous to somebody who cannot provide a justification for mathematical truths, because what you're saying is no one, even the theist, can not provide a justification for mathematical truths. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, from the perspective of the given conversation.
He's saying whether or not persons exist is independent of any of our opinions. It's just whether or not persons exist.
But so, like you said, that the point of premise 1 is that no one can give a justification, right?
Yeah.
No, but you believe that God is an acceptable foundation, right?
Yeah.
Right, but no one can give a foundation. And like Agent Smith and Discernible are not the set of no one. To establish that it's no one, it has to be an argument that isn't a dialogue with an individual.
I'm not following whom the dialogue, whether there's a dialogue is with an individual in the sense that the individual is partaking in the debate or dialogue. But
what I mean is that the support for premise 1 has to be a monologue.
Or put differently, the fact that the 6-7 people in this Discord call can't provide a foundational justification for X doesn't mean that somewhere out there is not a foundational justification for X.
That's right.
Right. No, I agree with that, but I would have two responses to that. One, it's not an appeal to authority. It's like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not saying like, hey guys, like on the spot, do we have a justification? Like no one can identify it, and then I'm like, haha, see, like you guys can't do it. It's like it's like, let's look at the record. Let's look at like what's been like. Let's look at Western philosophy.
But that's just a longer list of individual conversations. The argument for premise 1 has to be a monologue, right? Like it.
Why are you saying that? So, like, premise 1 is that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge claims, right?
Right. So, and that has to be argued for regardless of the deficiencies of my position.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be argued for when you're outside of your worldview. At Baked Alaska, I totally agree that your worldview is completely logically consistent, and the argument you're making within your worldview is logical.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's true.
I don't understand.
It has to be argued for regardless of deficiencies in my position.
It doesn't mean it's true. I agree with that. I agree with that, Visionary. But but when you're confronted where there's two scenarios, one where you're getting all these indicators of truth, and then the other one where you get absurdity, that should be like a red flag going off.
That's a probabilistic argument.
I don't really understand what this absurdity is that you.
Well, I think all reductio absurd. It's not clear whether it's an express contradiction or absurdity and where that line is drawn. But if you end up in an absurd world where you can't make any sense of anything, right? It's not like something trivial. This is like everything in reality collapses.
Yeah, but the argument the argument for why that would be true has to be a monologue.
What do you mean by monologue? Just out of curiosity.
Well, a dialogue with an individual person, the problems with my position don't establish the truth of premise one. Establishing the truth of premise one has to be carried out regardless of what I think.
Oh, okay. They have to kind of give a formal proof. It's not a dialogue.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now, but yes and no, because what I mean by that is like from a like philosophical perspective, yes, like that needs to be written in like a paper and it needs to be fleshed out. I think I think that has been. That's what I was going to say. I think that has been done.
Oh, I would love to see it because, as far as I know, that doesn't exist.
That's like Van Til, and they've written. They have Bonson and those guys. They wrote.
Yeah, the Bonson debate with Stein was kind of like a landmark moment.
I've read about 200 pages total of Van Til, Bonson, and Frame. So obviously it's not all of it. Just about 200 pages total, and I never saw anything like what I'm asking for here.
Did you read? I see. I'm actually very new to this argument. I actually only like converted back to. With theism. Like, what year is this? 2024. I think like maybe like 4 years ago or whatever COVID was back then.
So you understand what I'm asking for, right?
Huh?
You understand what I'm asking for, and you're not sure where it is. My claim is it doesn't exist, in that presuppers on the internet get asked for it all the time.
How do you know?
Never answer.
How do you know it doesn't exist?
I'm sorry?
You're just speculating it doesn't exist, though, right?
Well, isn't it? You're asking him to prove a negative, though, right now.
No. What I'm saying is presuppers get asked for this all the time. Yeah, and nobody ever provides it.
I can't speak to that. I mean, like, how am I? I can't. I'm not in a position to speak to that claim. I'm just saying. I think it's out there because it's not like the internet was around when this stuff like was worked on.
But like I said, I
do
read
recall,
about 200 pages of Bonson, Van Til, and Frame, and I didn't see anything like this.
Like Seitan Bruggencate, when he was doing the rounds of this argument, was basically saying it doesn't require a justification because of this internal consistency.
Yeah, well, that guy's a clown.
Well, okay, for sure, but
the point is, Baked Alaska, if you know where it is, you can just point me in the direction, and then I'm wrong.
I actually only started learning about this particular argument like a few months ago, so I'm not the person to ask that question. But like,
you're not the person to ask for the whole point. The whole point is premise one. That's what all the discussions turn around.
What?
Premise one of tag. That's what all discussions of tag turn around.
I'm not sure I understand what your overall argument is, though. You're saying if you don't see it in written form, it doesn't exist or something? Like,
no, I mean, nobody ever points at it and say, here's the argument.
Why does it have to be in written form? Why can't it just be videos, debates, or whatever?
It could be in any location, in any medium.
Yeah, but didn't you watch the debates? You haven't watched these debates with Bonson and Stein and the other guy that he debated. They talked about it. Yeah.
And he doesn't give an argument for premise one.
Yes, he does. Then I would go back and rewatch it. He definitely gives it. You don't think he gives? I mean, it's not this form of the argument. That's why he's not presenting. There's various. That's what I think the issue is that there's all these different variations of the transcendental argument.
Well,
so when you're saying
premise one, God is a necessary condition of like whatever. People fill in whatever with different blanks.
Rational thought,
right? Like I've.
Yeah. Yes. But that changes like the premise, though.
So just to jump in here, guys, because I've been talking to so many presuppers, I've actually started listening to a course on metaphysics to get myself kind of warmed up again. I don't think that course is going to have a final lecture that says this whole thing. It turns out that everybody was wrong, but in this lecture, I'm going to tell you the exact nature of reality. Because everybody else is full of shit.
I just want to be like clear with like Bakes Alaska that we know what I'm asking for, and I've never heard like a presupper give it.
Well, who have you asked though?
Well, okay, like I said, I've read about 200 pages of Bonson, Van Til, and Frame.
That's not a lot.
No, you're right. I've listened to a lot of Darth Dawkins, listened to a lot of Jay Dyer, a lot of Eli Ayala. I'm subscribed to his podcast.
Did you read the book that Van Til wrote? Oh, no, I think it was Bonson. It was called...
Van Til's Apologetic?
I think it's called The Objective Proof for Christianity or something. Hold on, I'll look on Amazon.
No, I haven't heard of that book.
Oh, it's not even on Amazon. I think you can only buy their books like on their website, right? Hold on, I'll post.
I mean, if there's an objective truth to Christianity, I would love to have that.
I got to dip out for a minute.